Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Alfonso David. I am the president and the CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum, and I'm also a civil rights lawyer.
Hello, everyone. I am Ebony McMorris, the White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Networks. We are so pleased to be here tonight. I'm happy to be able to co-host this amazing town hall, Paint the Polls Black.
So, folks, a few weeks ago, we launched Paint the Polls Black, which is a voter awareness, registration, and mobilization initiative. It's supported by the Sundial Group of companies, which includes Essence, the Global Black Economic Forum, Girls United, Afropunk, Refinery 29, Beautycon, and the New Voices Foundation. And again, the focus here is to educate, mobilize, and register voters to take action this November and into the future. We hosted our first town hall in the beginning of August with Congresswomen Jasmine Crockett and Chantel Brown, Bakari Sellers, Van Lathan, Lene Vinay, and kicking us off last time was the one and only D. Nice. And tonight we're hosting our second town hall where we will be dissecting some of the key policy issues and discussing how they affect you, the voter.
We had a good time the first go around, and we're going to do it again. I'm so excited about today. Look, there are many issues that I am sure you have all heard about, from immigration to housing, from economy to education, from democracy to public safety. We can't address all of them. However, tonight we are going to tackle three of the most important issues: the economy, healthcare, and public safety. Now, this campaign is tailored to provide information, address misinformation, and register voters for one of the most important consequential elections of our lifetime. We will be joined by a few special guests, and we'll be answering your questions. We want to hear from you. So we got a few housekeeping rules. First, this is a nonpartisan call focused on voter registration and mobilization. Further, it's not a fundraising call. There are other events focused on that. We'll be answering your questions, so please put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can before the end of the town hall.
Also, please see the link for voter registration. One of our main goals here is to make sure that we are all registered to vote. If you have not registered to vote, please do. You can go to hashtag Paint the Polls Black. You can go to our website to get that information and register to vote. And then finally, sit back and relax and enjoy this town hall. And it is my pleasure to welcome our very first guest for this town hall, Mr. Kenny Burns, who is a multimedia entertainer, an investor, and a producer. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure to be with you, Alfonso and Ebony. How you guys doing?
We're doing good. I'm doing good. I'm trying to figure out what is on your mind. Look, I'm just getting to it. I want to talk about the debate. What are your thoughts on what we saw during the debate?
During the debate, I saw a good old-fashioned grandma butt whooping. It was get in the closet and stay there. I didn't really appreciate the after effects of the debate. The debate was exactly what I thought it would be. You have a highly educated person talking to a non-educated person. You have a lawyer by heart and trade talking to a criminal. And in that exchange, you saw all the uncomfortableness as if he was on the stand. I mean, as soon as she went to the size of his audience, it just went all the way left. He was unhinged. And I honestly was so happy to see that. The problem is post the debate, you literally see the audacity of news outlets as well as the talking head saying that he won the debate. And now there's this farce of I didn't curse. Did you like that? I said farce. It is a farce of a statement saying that, heavyweight fighters don't fight again when they win the title. It's like, I mean, who is believing this? And the problem is that no matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, every cycle, the margin of victory seems to be this big. So it's it's a wild moment, and it's actually heartbreaking when you think about our democracy
Mm.
longer being what we've grown up to know it to be.
Kenny, I want to ask you a question that I think many people, and specifically Black people, have been just sort of shocked about, and that's the dogs and the cats.
Oh man.
Let's talk
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, that was dog whistle for not just cannibals, obviously, but animals. And I think that, when you think about the way they look at us, I have this conversation all the time on my podcast, The Kenny Burns Show, that, it's not even a thing of the backdoor conversations anymore. It's not what they think about you behind your back. They're telling you. Just the other day, he had a Klansman and at a stop sign where people were holding up Trump signs. And it's like, you feel that comfortable, being outside in a Ku Klux Klan outfit in 2024. He's evoking an emotion across America that's very disturbing. And the sad part is that as much as it is about race, it's class that is taking over the directive of all of these dog whistles being blown, all of these narratives being pushed into the algorithms, and quite frankly, messing with our children's minds. They don't know what to believe. They're seeing all types of memes. I mean, to think that a Jamaican is not Black is the most outrageous thing I've ever heard in my life. But then to double down on things and for kids to actually, repeat these things is really disturbing.
Go ahead, Emily.
Kenny, what you mentioned the Klansman. I couldn't figure out why there was a Black man standing beside the man with the but I digress. Right. What do you believe when we talk about this, right? What are some of the key issues then at stake at this election, and how should voters begin to prioritize them when they cast their ballots?
Yeah, that's a loaded question on many levels, and many answers to it. Well, first of all, our democracy is on the table. Laws. I truly believe that he meant what he said when he said, if you vote this one time, my good Christians, you won't have to vote again. I think we should hear him loud and clear. He was in that debate completely lying about his participation. When I watched the TV and heard him say, go down there and fight like hell, because if you don't fight like hell, we're going to lose everything we know to be true and white. I mean, he didn't say the white part, but that's what he meant. And I think that at the end of the day, it's like, what type of country would we have with this type of ideology, in office? And when I go to the gym the next day, white, Black, indifferent, they're all unbelievably disturbed by the cat and the dog comments. It's like, would you really say that in a debate? Because one of my white friends was telling his brother, who's a staunch Trump supporter, and this is how slim the margins are in households and families. You got one that's totally embarrassed. You got another one who's standing by and he's just dismissing it. He said he called him and said, yeah, I'm putting some cats and dogs on the grill. Are you coming over tonight? Because he knows he's a Trump. He's like, oh, I didn't even watch it. Trump's going to beat her, da-da-da. But that's the mentality. The mentality is like, I don't care what he says. I don't care what he does. But that lets you know, ladies and gentlemen, that there is a racial divide, that there is a class divide. And we have to be aware of it. And the thing that I think we could do outside of going to the ballot box and winning this election, because if we all go to the ballot box, there's no way that there will be a small margin of victory, is to call people out. There's a respective way to make people feel so uncomfortable they're embarrassed to do it. I know for a fact, Donald Trump going to the spin room immediately after that debate, he was grasping for straws. His underwear were on fire. And then you have somebody like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is literally, I want to say a lot of things, but this is not my platform, but he's about the crowd size too. He's about the attention. He's about all the things he doesn't get in real life. And ladies and gentlemen, you have to pay attention to the people that build their worlds around their inconsistencies. Facebook, when you look at Elon Musk and what he's doing with X, these are things that these insecure men have always done. But guess what we have to do? Vote. That's how we beat them.
As we talk about voting, one of the issues that we're hearing a lot about in this election, and we've heard about it for years, right? Every election cycle, Black men, Where are Black men? Where are they going to vote? Are they going to vote? Talk to us a little bit about your perspective on how can Black men play a pivotal role in this election? And from your perspective, what specific issues are you hearing from Black men that we should be focused on to ensure that our voices are heard?
I'm glad you brought that up, Alfonso, because when I got back from the premiere Fight Night, the $1 Million Heist, now on Peacock, the #1 show that I'm executive producing, we had a premiere last week in New York, and I came back on Friday to do a Fight for Our Democracy. That's right. It was Fight for Our Democracy. Kasim Reed, Arian Simone, co-founder of the Fearless Fund, who just got their case dismissed. So big shout to them and all the amazing work they're doing for women-led founders, and Datavio from Revolt. And we did a panel, and everybody was talking about what needs to happen and what needs to be done. And I was like, well, I think Black men are as key to this election as white women. And I say that because I had posted from the DMC, her nieces had said how to correctly pronounce her name. And so I have fun on my platform. And I said, hey, comma, la. If the babies can say it, you can say it. Let's say it together, comma, la. And it was going through this whole thing. And the Russian bots attacked my Instagram feed like I had never saw. But then I started seeing NBA basketball player. I'm like, wait, he said something twice. And the one NBA player said, well, why should we say her name correctly? And she hasn't done anything for us. I said, well, do you love your mom? I said, it's the respect thing that you're taught, right? But then a lot of Black women just don't like women for whatever reason. I don't know if it's because they have always saved us from ourselves or always have pushed us to the point of execution when we couldn't finish get to the finish line. I don't know what you don't love about Black women. I know they saved me. So I get so confused about the hate speech, and then I get confused with the lack of consistency for us showing up for our Black women. I mean, when you have, again, rhetoric coming from all over the place, and mind you, we know, I'm sorry, a lot of people don't know, but intelligent people know that a lot of the stuff you just can't think is real, right? But then the people that are ignorant, that have no clue, don't read, don't want the information, they are stuck with those memes. And so I just want to encourage my Black men, one, to have men our age, Alfonso, to talk to younger Black men and say, look, the one thing 19 Keys, a friend of mine, has said, he had said, Kenny, you show up for us. You talk to us. Even though you give us that OG and tell us how we need to be moving and mobilizing, you still let us talk to you. And I feel like the disconnect between Black men and Kamala, talking to all of my mentees, is that they don't feel she talks to them. I said, well, you know what? I can't believe that because I follow the news. I read newspapers. I see the foreign, dignitary stuff that she does on our behalf as a country. I know her being an alumni from Howard University. I'm not in her age bracket, but my wife graduated from Howard University. But I think it's the whole thing of like, if you knew something about someone, if you saw the journey from attorney to attorney general to senator to, vice president, you could respect the resume just as a human. Let's talk human, right? If you go through the resume of the competitor on the other side, it's a whole farce of racism, classism, bankruptcies and all type of things you would never want to be involved with as a human. But then you look at the other side and you have this much service for the majority of your life, and you can't give the benefit to someone of saying their name correctly. So I think we have a lot of work to do with understanding what this really is, how we should approach it, and more importantly, how, we can feel good about showing up for this woman that deserves to be president of the United States.
I love everything that you said, especially the respect part. I do want to remind people, look, if you got questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Kenny, I want to ask you this, because when we're talking about, there was a lot of folk, DNC, it was a lot of love. We got conferences going on, CBC going on right now. But for those who aren't attending that, for the everyday person that's on the street, that's trying to work, that's got 2 and 3 jobs, do you think sometimes that I can rattle off what the vice president has done, but do you think sometimes the language needs to shift? So we hear terms like democracy or disenfranchised all the time, but those aren't necessarily, you're not sitting at a table with your family saying, oh, democracy is it. No, you're like, we hungry. What are we going to do? What's going to happen with this business? Do you think that needs to sometimes how we talk change that language, and would that help in even attracting younger generations or Black men also?
Yeah, I think, hearing people, engages them, willing to listen to the things that they truly feel. As a parent, my sons have said things to me that I could not possibly fathom them actually feeling, because we did not grow up like daddy grew up or mommy grew up. We have love in the house. We have two visible parents that are working hard to make sure your dreams come true. Like, how could you possibly feel this way? But they do. And you can't ignore that. And I think that we have to listen, but also in the same conversation of being a parent, we can never, ever, they would never, ever understand the work that's being done if they don't travel outside their neighborhoods. I travel every week. I see infrastructure being done all over the country, every city I go to. That's the Biden-Harris administration at work. I do know the things that are happening, but see, a lot of people don't. And it wouldn't be much like parenting. Again, you wouldn't get your flowers as a parent until they're grown and they're going through it themselves. But that's the disconnect, with the generations. It's like, okay, people know that suburban, Atlanta's going to vote Black. Atlanta and the surrounding areas from Sandy Spring to, College Park, all the surround, that's going to be blackity, black, black, black. But they depend on the rest of Georgia, which is toothless, meth, white, bonuses on Friday if you go vote. I'm just telling y'all the truth. But see, the problem with us is we can't depend on the youngins to just go vote, because they have too many questions without thinking about the things that they can't see. We have to believe. It's like believing in Jesus Christ, the things unseen. I'm not saying believe in politicians like Jesus. I'm not saying that. But you believe in things that you admire or desire without sight. You believe in things that these goals you want to accomplish in your life without actually touching them. So why can't you give someone the benefit of the doubt? But see, the problem is we don't want to do the work the rest of the 3 years before the next election. We just want to go crazy, hear all these things, go vote, and think it's just going to magically, disappear. But we have local and state elections to adhere to as well.
Kenny, final question. As we're thinking about this election cycle, we are facing, as you have alluded to and mentioned, some misinformation, disinformation, some apathy from young people. What are you finding to be the most effective tool? Say folks are watching tonight, they are facing challenges with having conversations with their kids or their parents or their friends. What are you finding are the most effective tools that are working in your communications, in your discourse with other folks?
I'm finding that the truth along with proof is not enough to just be the truth anymore. The fake news, industry that he's created, him clearly denying a loss in a debate where we all watch the debate. So you have to have the truth, and then you have to have proof, and you have to double down on that. You cannot deliver either without the other. So I would suggest us all continue to put messaging out in the world that is factual, double down on those facts, have conversations like these that Essence are providing for, people in the community that are doing this work every day. There are, honorable people with honorable messaging, with honorable intentions, but you look into these rappers and all these people that, are being paid to play, like, come on, like there are actual activists that mean it and want to, authentically show up for you and have intention, in representation for you. So, I think, truth and proof. If you could show it with both, it's lights out, Joe Jackson.
Kenny Burns, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for your investments. Thank you for the producing work that you do. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us today and to actually do this work that is so critical for this election.
Yes. Ebony, Alfonso, thank you for having me. And I'm going to leave you with a little fun. You guys be good.
I love it. I love it. Wow. I'm going to take that truth along with proof. I texted myself that. I'm going to use that again. I love it. Well, we are moving on to another issue that affects us all, the economy. Kristen Powell is the principal of Black Futures Lab and Black to the Future Action Fund, who recently released the Black Economic Agenda, informed by the Black Census Project, the largest survey of Black people in the U.S. since Reconstruction. Hey, Kristen.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you absolutely do, the work that is being done. Start by telling us, though, about the background and the methodology of the Black Economic Agenda and some of the key findings.
Yeah, so the Black Economic Agenda actually starts with the Black Census Project. What you'll learn about our organization is that we have a lot of acronyms all starting with Black. So the Black Census Project is the largest survey of Black people in American history that's known, that we've conducted now twice. And the second time that we did it over the last 18 months, we spoke with 211,000 Black people across this country and really made sure to get a cross section of our people, because we're not a monolith. So we talk to folks that are incarcerated, people that are Black people that are immigrants, trans community, rural communities, as well as folks in the city in all 50 states. And we wanted to understand, what do Black people want? What do they care about in their communities? What do they think about elections and politicians and institutions? And what we found, no surprise, is that we are most concerned about our pocketbook and this economy as a whole. And that is why we created the Black Economic Agenda, our C4 organization, Black to the Future. And you can go to our website, blacktothefuture.org, and check it out. And that is a policy roadmap on how we can use policy to help Black communities thrive. And it has three parts. So the first is about wages and workers' protections. There's a lot of conversations right now about more jobs being created. And that's great for the economy. But if you don't pay us what we're owed, that is not good for the economy. And so it's really important that along with adding jobs, we are also making sure that Black people make what we deserve and that we're protected and we get paid leave, sick leave, family leave. The second part of our agenda is about budget and taxes. So what we learned from the Black Census Project, and what I know, is that I'm paying into a system and I want my money back. I want to get all the different benefits that come from paying into the tax code. And so do Black people all across this country, according to the Census Project. And what we want back is, we want investments in small businesses. Mm-hmm. We want investments in housing. We want better schools for our communities. And we do not want most of our tax dollars going to war and policing. But the third thing for us is about what we're calling thriving communities, and that's cost of living, right? That's the bread and butter issues that we're talking about. And you're hearing a lot about the cost of food, and that's one part of it. But really, we're talking about the cost of housing. Childcare cost is really important to Black communities, and it keeps a lot of our folks who want to work out of the workplace. But then also the cost of healthcare, which, if I can just say, I know someone else is speaking about this later, that it's a life and death decision when we have governors like Brian Kemp, who are not accepting extra money for Medicaid from the federal government. And what he's saying to his folks is, I don't care if you die or not, because when you don't have access to healthcare, it is a life or death problem. And so we also see it as an economic one. If we can't afford healthcare, that we are setting ourselves up for a road to death, and we don't deserve that. And then lastly, we want that student loan debt gone. So we're also very interested in student loan debt disappearing. And so what we're asking is that folks go to blacktothefuture.org and check out that agenda. You can endorse it online. We already have 10,000 Black folks who have endorsed the agenda, so you can check it out there. And we also want you to make a plan to vote, and to know that it's not just about the federal elections, but the local and state elections that really determine our economy.
So I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about something that I think most folks would be interested in, of course, which is generational wealth, creating Black wealth. When certainly that starts with, to a large degree, by when we talk about wages. The Congressional Black Caucus, as we mentioned earlier, this is CBC week. They recently introduced legislation on the Black wealth agenda, and really thinking about what are the pillars that we need to look at when we're talking about creating, through the legislative lens, through the policy lens, Black wealth. But nearly half of the Black workers are earning less than $15 an hour.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about how elected leaders could prioritize wage increases and what impact does that really have on economic security for Black families?
Yeah, and in the Black economic agenda, I'm here at the CBC, you see my hotel TV behind you. We're pushing for at least $17 an hour, and that if we're going to get legislation passed that has a minimum wage, that legislation actually includes continuous increases so that we don't have to come back to this fight again in 5 years when cost of living has gone up, which is really important. And so what officials can do is they can act, right? There's a lot of power that we have by being brave, if you're an elected official, and organizing the folks even at the federal level, but also states also enact minimum wages at the state level, so state assemblies and state legislatures, to get a minimum wage passed. And it's also important that if you're a legislator or elected official, that you're also engaging corporations and holding them accountable for fair wages, because it's not just about the jobs that the government can have control over. It's also about all of these corporations that are making billions on the backs of Black people and not paying us what we're worth.
Kristen, we know that when we talk about home ownership, that home ownership has always been a great vehicle to create Black wealth, but we are seeing home ownership gaps and also the rising cost of rent that's been affecting Black communities and hitting Black communities the hardest. How might voting for candidates who support housing reforms help close this gap?
Yeah, it's still true that home ownership leads to lessening that wealth gap, right? All of that land and housing. I'm not an economist and I can't tell you the year, but all of the different incentives that white people got that we were locked out of in mid-century that got people into home ownership that they're now benefiting from decades and decades and decades later. We deserve that. And we need to be voting for people that are going to give incentives to home ownership. But also it's important that even if we can't own a home, that rent is not crippling us, that we actually are not pushed out of our neighborhoods because of gentrification. And so we do want to close that wealth gap, but also we need to make sure that folks that choose to rent or want to rent are not being crippled as well.
So we're talking about this wealth gap, and I just want to make sure we're grounding people on what we're saying. And I often use this because I think is a good framework for us to think about the wealth gap. So when Martin Luther King gave his speech, the I Have the Dream speech in the 1960s, the wealth gap was 8-1 between Black and white people. Today, that gap is 12-1. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about this wealth gap. And the wealth gap, of course, is informed by how much money you're making at your job, but it is not wages. It is assets. Like, do you own a home? Do you own an asset that you can turn over to a descendant when you pass away? And in many cases, Black people are falling into this wider gap where, we have less assets, we have less resources to pass on to our families. So when we think about this wealth gap, Kristen, talk to us about taxation. If you are working for an employer or if you own your business, you're paying taxes, or you should be paying taxes. But there is a racial disparities within the tax system. Talk to us about this policy issue and how it affects or is informed by voting in this election cycle.
Yeah, it's really important. And one just quick point on the wealth gap and assets, back to wages, is that on top of having fair wages, we also need our folks to get fair benefits, which include 401ks and different ways to invest in the market and that way too. But so that's really important. But back to taxes. So there's a bunch of levels to this, right? Because we're paying, many of us, into local, state, and federal taxes, and we're not benefiting from that system the way that we should, and our communities aren't. I mean, in some communities, we're paying into taxes as a group, but yet the neighborhoods that get funding for better playgrounds or for some of the infrastructure aren't Black neighborhoods, right? So we're not even getting exactly back what we're putting in. And that's a local issue as well as a state issue. Also, our city and state budgets should be decided by the people. And many of our cities, 40% of the city budget is going to police and fire. And when we're asking for, as a community, more resources for housing, for different community services, the answer is always no, we don't have enough money, yet there's more and more money being given to the police departments. And so taxes also means that we need participatory budgeting, where our people are a part of the process of what we're spending our city budgets on and our state budgets on. Because when we're not a selfish people, and when we win, everyone wins, and what we want is helpful for the entire country. And so taxes as well as budgeting is a really important part, and we need to be paying attention to what the folks that are running for office are saying about those things.
I love that you talk about that. Earlier, just to go back, it was the GI Bill for veterans that really is what helped create this housing.
I knew that.
Yeah, it was the GI Bill. And sometimes we just have to go back. I mean, I know, but a lot of times we have many in our community that are asking why things are the way that they are, and the issues that we have are truly systemic. They go back for decades. And so the GI Bill was something that all veterans couldn't participate in, and for Black veterans, that was a major issue. And so we didn't see that wealth transfer that most of our white counterparts were able to have. I want to talk for a second about child affordability. We recently heard former President Donald Trump at during a policy conversation that he was having in New York. He was asked about a child care costs and what policy he wanted. And in his statement, he said that child care costs aren't that bad in America. But I want to ask you, why, what is your opinion on childcare affordability? Why is this such an essential issue for Black communities? And how could this issue also affect voter priorities in the upcoming election?
Yeah, I was at the CBC earlier, and one of the panelists talked about the rage that you sometimes get when you hear elected or public officials or candidates talk about issues in a way that's just so degrading. I'm a mother of a 4-year-old, and he is in half-day preschool, and I'm still spending over $1,000 a month in childcare. And so many parents and families in this community, in this country, are paying more than what it costs for their housing for childcare. And it is pushing more and more women out of the workforce that want to actually be in the workforce. And it is adding even more divide or getting the wealth gap even more, because we're not able to contribute in a way that we want to, right, in our communities. Also, childcare workers are grossly underpaid as well. And so we do have a problem that not just affordable childcare, but safe childcare with people that we can trust with our children. And so when you hear Donald Trump saying it's not that bad, that alone should disqualify him when he is also saying that we have to be forced to have forced to have children, if we're not able to, forced to have life-threatening procedures when we might have had a miscarriage, when we're being told that IVF is something that we shouldn't even be considering, and then at the same time not having any sort of policy proposals for childcare. It's maddening.
I almost wish that they would have pushed back and said, do you know how much the average costs of childcare is. Because if you're going to speak on something, you should know what the average cost of something is. But I digress. Oh, we got people in the comments. The average American has 3 to 5 children. Someone said he's grossly out of touch.
For folks who are just joining us, we are hosting Paint the Polls, which is a voter registration, voter mobilization, voter awareness initiative. We are being joined by Kristen Powell, who's the principal of Black Futures Lab, and we're talking about issues that affect the economy, or we should say, we're talking about the economy and how it affects you. I think, Kristen, we're going to keep you just for a few more questions before we go into the next topic. I want to talk about an issue that is in the headlines right now, diversity, equity, and inclusion, workplace protections. As many people know, I'm one of the lawyers representing the Fearless Fund. That case recently settled. We're seeing a lot of litigation around the country. We're seeing a lot of legislation around the country regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion and workplace protections. Talk to us a little bit about where we are as it relates to labor laws, improving economic outcomes for Black people and people of color and working people all across the country.
Unfortunately, we are not very far, right? And especially Black people are so vulnerable to corporate greed. And so many of us, especially care workers, who are largely unseen, but are the backbones of this country, restaurant workers, folks that work in the healthcare system, many of them don't have the protections that they deserve. And it's also important that we fight for paid leave and family leave, because going back to that healthcare conversation, that when we have children or we have things happen in our life with our family in terms of healthcare concerns, we deserve a right to go back to work and not be punished for those things that happen in our life. And that's not happening across the board. And so it's really important that we focus on that issue.
Well, I want to talk for just a second also about loan forgiveness. I mean, we hear a lot, what happened? What was done? I haven't had this, haven't had that. But when we talk about what happened under this Biden administration, as far as student loan forgiveness, it was millions of Americans that were able to get their loans forgiven. But we also saw a huge target, over 20 lawsuits that were targeted at the administration when it came to loan forgiveness. But we also know, and we talked earlier about home ownership, that many of those who had their loans forgiven, there were studies that show that they also took that money and put it towards buying and purchasing a home, not wasting the money, but using that. So with initiatives like loan forgiveness and targeted funding programs being crucial to reducing racial disparities in business ownership, how can voters support policies that ensure Black entrepreneurs receive financial support that is needed to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, on that student loan, I mean, I'm one of those people who paid off the student loan. I did not get forgiveness, but I was able to pay mine off, and then I bought a house. So I think it's very true how many people are using that in order to invest in businesses or invest in home ownership. And it's really important. And it's also important not just to forgive the loans, but also to make college affordable moving forward.
Yes.
And to make sure that, especially in your states, that they are passing laws that give funding for state schools, HBCUs as well, making sure that we make college affordable for everyone moving forward. And then can you repeat the second part of your last question? Because it wasn't about student loans.
No, it was about the financial, letting people know, understand how important this is, because you just talked about it earlier, I mean, just a second ago, about also using that money now that they've had their loans forgiven to go towards business. So how can basically voters support the policies that ensure Black entrepreneurs receive financial support that is needed to succeed? We were talking about the Fearless Fund earlier. When we talk about how much money that Black business owners actually see VC funding, it is, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, Alfonso, it's less than 2%?
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Yeah, so $288 billion is allocated through the venture capital space each year. $288 billion. And of the $288 billion, less than 1% goes to Black people. Less than 0.036% goes to Black women. So, and this, right, we're talking about investments in businesses. We're talking about the ability to grow your business, which is why the Fearless Fund is so important, which is why venture capitalism is so important. All of these entrepreneurs that are out there who are creating opportunities and making investments in other Black and brown businesses so that they not only can sustain themselves, but that they can grow.
I think people need to sometimes we know what we want to happen, but what are the questions that we need to be asking our policymakers in our communities to make sure that we're getting it? So when we're going to the polls, you may know which candidate you want, but even the person that you want, be engaged and ask certain questions about their policies concerning that. Kristen, what are some of the things that people need to be asking as they're going to the polls before they get to the polls? Even from those who they think they may be in favor from, you still have to put an ask in.
Yeah, I mean, the big question is how. So there's a lot of I'm going to, Donald Trump is great at this, of saying I'm going to do the biggest thing ever, right? And can't really say specifically how or what. And so we really need to be asking, do you have a plan for investing in small businesses? The person that's running says yes. What is the plan? Where can I find it? How does it work? How will it impact me personally? If you're wanting to know about healthcare, right, or healthcare costs, do you have a plan for healthcare affordability? Have you, if this is a state, what are you doing about expanding Medicaid in in our state? If we're talking about housing, what is your plan to get more people in our community into home ownership? How is that going to work? Making sure that we are looking at each one of these things related to the economy and asking, what are you going to do? And then how are you going to do it? And if there is no plan, this is not someone that you want to be voting for. On November 5th, it's really important that there's stark choices here. We have one side of the aisle that is continuing to talk about the trickle-down politics that doesn't work, right? Giving tax credits to the corporations and then saying it's going to come to the people. It never does. That is why the wage gap is so large, right? And then we have another side talking about an opportunity economy that is investing in people, having actual policy proposals like giving cash payments to help with housing costs, like bringing down the price of prescriptions. But the choice is not just about the top of the ticket. It's about state elections and local elections and really understanding what's at stake in those elections, who's running and what are their plans for the local and state economies, and making a plan yourself to vote, making sure that all the people in your family have a plan to vote on November 5th and then stay in the fight on November 6th and after, because that's really where we ensure that we're actually delivered for.
Kristen Powell, principal of Black Futures Lab, thank you so much for joining us. Again, for folks who have just joined us, please feel free to put into the comments questions and we'll have an opportunity to answer some of your questions.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And now we're going to shift to another major policy issue that truly affects all of us, and that's healthcare. From access to healthcare to controlling our bodies, to addressing health disparities and the outcomes that we face. We're now going to be dissecting some of these issues relating to healthcare and how they affect you. To help us do that, we are being joined by two experts in the field. The first is Monica Simpson, who is the executive director of Sister Song, which is a reproductive justice organization. Monica is known worldwide as a leader in healthcare and reproductive justice and was recently named by Time magazine as one of the most influential people. She's also a fantastic person. Second, we have Saida Dunstan, who is the CEO of Elm Core Youth and Adult Activities, which is the oldest Black-founded and Black-led not-for-profit in Queens, New York. They provide a variety of comprehensive programs that serve our community. She's also been recognized by her peers and human resource and service providers for developing and implementing culturally competent services that address the challenges encountered by marginalized communities. She's also been sounding the alarm on the epidemic of opioid overdoses in the Black community. Saida, Monica, thank you so much for both joining us.
I love it. We got Time Magazine in the house.
Thank you. And it's so great to be on here with you, Saida. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you both women, ladies, for the work that you do. I mean, just hearing and reading the accomplishments and the fact that you are still 10 toes down, grounded now, and still pushing to do the work. And we know that work that you do is not easy. I want to start off with this healthcare conversation, broadly discussing access to healthcare. It's an important issue in this year's election, but many may say, even though it was addressed, we have Obamacare that we're still talking about. What are the challenges that you see at this time when it comes to access to healthcare, even with the great achievements that we have seen?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we are still very much dealing with those challenges that you talked about, right? So Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, yes, incredible strides have been made with that. However, when we think about some of the most densely populated areas of this country where our Black folks are the most, like the South in particular, we are still seeing so many of our states across this country that have yet to expand Medicaid. That is something we have not talked about enough when we talk about what we mean around expanding access to healthcare in this country. So without the expansion of Medicaid, thousands upon thousands of people are still falling through the cracks just to get their very basic healthcare needs met. We also have to think about how that is directly coupled with the economic crisis that we're in this country, because that is another access and another barrier that so many people are constantly talking about. Do we have enough money? Are we making enough money to be able to take care of our healthcare needs? That is still a huge gap for so many people in this country. And then on top of that, right, when we think about what we're actually experiencing when we enter into these healthcare providers, are we getting the right information? Are we getting treated the way that we need to be treated? That is an issue that we see come up so much, in particular around reproductive health care in this country, where maternal mortality is a huge issue and we are in a crisis in this country. What we have seen time and time again is that we are still battling the ways that racism shows up in our healthcare system, meaning that people, in particular Black people and people of color, are not getting the type of care that they deserve once they are able even to enter into getting into a healthcare provider. So when you look at all of those things on top of each other, right, and we can go on for days and days about all the other things that come up around this issue of healthcare in this country, we are seeing that we are still very much dealing with a crisis and we have a lot of gaps to fill.
So Zahida, we often hear about this concept of social determinants of health. Can you please help us break that down? What is it? Why is it important to us? How does it play a role in addressing our healthcare needs? And specifically, why would it be relevant in an election season?
Yeah. First, let me just say, Ebony, you thanked us and was really excited. I have to say, this idea of this conversation overall, I want to just be grateful to be a part of it. Monica, really excited to hear what you're saying. But as we talk about social determinants, this painting the polls Blacks is a part of that concept of understanding how social interactions that we have, things that we deal with impacts. This is an exciting time, right? We talked about this earlier, about this time that we're having these conversations. It's exciting and also scary at the same time, because a lot of this idea of social determinants of care, whether we're talking about housing, we're talking about literal healthcare, if we're talking about education, if we're talking about all of those things, we talk about them every 4 years. And we have to continue these conversations, which is why it's exciting, but also scary. Our social determinants of care are really, in this country, clearly across the globe, but here uniquely wrapped around the racialized concepts of how we interact, right? And how we see Black people. And around this time of year, we are the hottest commodity. You know, our vote is very, very valuable. And what we have to do is not to continue to just give it away, but to demand things. And a part of the demand is that these social issues that are happening are racialized. They're clearly still very segregated. And we need to understand that our health, our wellness will never be addressed until we address all of these overlaying systems that sit on top of our ability to kind of take care of ourselves. Our trauma, our racialized trauma, is a part of the biggest social determinant of healthcare that we are most afraid to talk about.
Oh my goodness. I saw you snapping over there, Micah. I'm sitting here like, yes, Lord.
That's it. That's it.
We all can say at this point, I'm so tired right now.
Listen.
We work tired, we love tired, we push tired, you know what I mean? And so and have learned to try to function in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I always say that your body knows when it's time to sit down, and it will sit down whether you want to or not. I want to ask about, but on that, how does healthcare access intersect with other issues on the ballot? So many of the things that we talk about are all linked together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So talk about how it intersects with all these other things that we're talking about.
You know, what's interesting when I think about this concept of healthcare, it's like we sometimes put healthcare in one bucket. And because my work of reproductive justice is also very much on the ballot these days, I feel like they're separating reproductive healthcare away from healthcare in general, which let's just go ahead and debunk that right now. Reproductive healthcare is healthcare. Abortion access is healthcare. Maternal health is healthcare. All of these things are essential to us to be able to thrive and have healthy bodies and live healthy lives in this country. But when I think about how we've been able to now politicize this particular part of healthcare, of reproductive healthcare, and namely abortion in this country, this is where this conversation around healthcare is getting a little challenging, right? We just saw a debate a couple of nights ago where we had an opponent just spew lies about the fact that people are killing babies, and he doesn't know anything that he's talking about as it pertains to abortion. What is real, and what is real for us as Black folks to understand, is that abortion is an important part of our reproductive health care. It is something that we need to make sure it is legal, that we have access to it, and that is the fight that we have been in ever since this Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court level came down and took out a nearly 50-year precedent of Roe v. Wade. And so when we think about access to abortion in this country right now, there are 14 states right now that are actually have a total abortion ban. We have over 27 states at this point that have an actual abortion ban in place that's based on gestational limits, right? Whether that's 6 weeks or 18 weeks or whatever that may be. And then when we think about states like Mississippi, which is where the Dobbs decision actually originated from, that is a state that only had one abortion clinic for the entire state. So when we think about even when Roe v. Wade was in place, access to abortion care in this country was out of reach for far too many people, right? And so now that we have Roe out of the picture, which we did not need it out of the picture, we needed it to stay in place, but we knew that we needed to expand it. We are now seeing that this is now creating an even deeper healthcare crisis in this country, because this is now also affecting maternal health care, right? Because we also know the stats there that Black women are dying at a rate 4 to 5 to 12 times higher than white women rather, and white pregnant people in childbirth. And we know what that is linked to. We know what that's linked to racism. We know what that's linked to just not having proper access. But all of those things are coming into play now. And we are thinking about, now we're also seeing how this is connected to criminalization, because people are scared around this country that they don't know exactly what's going to happen if they need to go to their healthcare provider. Will this healthcare provider be targeted, right? Because they are trying to give them access to healthcare. Also in that debate, we heard a story, right, that came from Vice President Harris, because she has been on the road. She has talked to so many people, including organizations like mine, about what is happening around abortion in this country. And people are dealing with miscarriages and dealing with other healthcare issues where they need access to care. And because of this deep criminalization issue that's also attached to abortion right now, we're now seeing that people are being scared there. So healthcare and this branch off that people have overly politicized abortion access on is becoming a major contributing factor to how people are thinking about what they're going to walk into when they walk into these polls. What I tell people all the time around these issues is that you're going to walk into these polls, or you're going to make your way to those polls. You're taking your body in there. Make sure that you are voting for people who care about what happens to the body that you're taking into those polls. And that's where we are at this particular moment.
I want to stay for a moment on reproductive justice. What you're talking about, Monica, and certainly I want to hear your points on this seed as well. You've told us about the current landscape around the country and what we're seeing. How does this issue fall along the lines of race? What are the impacts along the lines of race?
The impacts are huge, right? Because what is happening is that, are y'all hearing me okay? Because I feel there's a little bit of an echo. Are we good?
Bit of an echo.
Okay. Hopefully we'll get better here. I'm literally on the road, so please forgive where I'm at this moment, because we out here in these streets painting these poles. But as we think about how this is broken down by race, overwhelmingly, what we have seen, whether it pertains to abortion access in this country, right? Whether it pertains to maternal health in this country, we are seeing that Black women and people of color are the communities most impacted when there are bans, when there is lack of access, whenever we take away any of our necessities, our human rights, right, in this country. It is us. It is the people that look like us that are always impacted the most, right? And when I would even go further to say that it's not just us, it's those who have historically been pushed to the margins, right? Because when I think about, not only when we think about this as racial lines, when I think about queer and trans people, when I think about young people, when I think about folks with just low incomes, these are the folks that are always, unfortunately, the ones that are the ones that are going to be the most impacted when we see these types of restrictions, bans, and limitations happen on our healthcare in this country. And that, to me, makes this issue even more important for us to move to the forefront, because if we are not centering our communities at this moment, if we're not making sure that our voices and our leadership is pushed to the front, then we are constantly being shown that we are not going to get what we need. Right. So that's really how this thing is breaking down. We're looking at the South, which is historically and demographically a place where our people are. And on top of that, we have to think about how this is affecting, again, those other marginalized communities as well.
Saida, I want to, we're talking earlier about how all these things are linked, like all the information that you just gave, we're feeling it, we know it, we live it, we see it. And then taking that, people are trying to figure out how to advocate for themselves in this situation. And to add another topic onto this, is we are also dealing with the opioid crisis. It is intersected into all of this. Like, how does the opioid crisis, talk about how that also intersects with many of these issues that we're talking about? And how can people begin to advocate for themselves as we go to the ballot box?
I think what we're doing today is really important. We're having the conversation. When we talk about substances, when we talk about overdose, we talk about it from an opioid perspective. We're hearing all this conversation about fentanyl, but it really is just about overdose as a whole. People are dying from using substances, whether the supply is tainted or not. But a lot of the reasons why we're in this situation, especially in the Black community, because I like to, as we're painting the polls Black, when we're talking about what is on the ballot box this November, I want to really talk about the reason why this is happening in our community. Black people are dying 5 times the rate that they were in the past in New York City, where I'm from. In 10 years, we saw it go up 5 times. Black men are 54.1% of Black men per 100,000 are dying fatally, in comparison to 44.2 white men. This is a crisis. If this was happening anywhere else, when this was happening somewhere else, we were having a different conversation. And so this is the important parts, is we have to allow ourselves as Black people to not allow the racialized stigmatization of us and our use of substances make us cower in the corners and not discuss it. Our people are dying. This is something very important. I'm excited about the fact that we're being invited to these types of forums to talk about something that no one's really talking about. But 4 years ago, when the face of those who were dying looked white, and I have to say looked it because Black people were still dying then, it was a softer public health approach. So one of the policy issues that we have to watch as we move forward, and we talk about addressing and tackling the fentanyl crisis, as our VP talked about in her pieces, and it's a part of her official presidential campaign, we have to also make sure that they do not criminalize substance use as they have done in the past when it has started to look or be presented to the world as a Black and brown issue. So we want it to be continued as a public health approach, an understanding that we need access to treatment, that we can get methadone, that we could get buprenorphine, so that we can actually address these things. It is really important that we do that, because if we don't, they will sound other alarms and criminalize the use of substances instead of actually trying to provide us access to appropriate health care. We know that in states, Monica talks about the South, we know that in states where they've chosen not to utilize the Affordable Care Act and the Medicaid expansion, that there are lower rates of people actually receiving substance use treatment. And so we, as Black people, have to stop allowing people to create a storyline, a narrative about us when we use substances, and that we have to humanize it first, demand that if whoever gets into any offices, that they realize that we will not allow you to criminalize something that happens in our community at the same rates as other communities, but that we are dying at higher rates because of the lack of access.
One of the things that we're trying to do with Paint the Polls is also address misinformation and make sure that we are providing accurate information and updating people on what the facts are. So there's a lot of information on social media. And Monica, this is a question for you really about the issue of reproductive justice and reproductive rights. Can you just walk people through, because we heard a lot in the debates about what you can do in certain states, and you alluded to this in terms of killing babies. Can you just tell us what is the current state of play so people actually know the facts?
Yeah, one thing I can say for certain, just to make it very, very clear, people are not carrying babies to full term and then killing them as if that is a real thing in this country. I could not believe that came out of a person's mouth that's trying to run for the presidency of the United States of America. That is absurd, and it's cruel to even say that is actually something that's happening in this country. It is not. But what is also true, because of what has happened with the Dobbs decision that did take out Roe, that it does look different across the country, right? So yes, the federal right has been taken away because of this Dobbs decision. So Roe v. Wade, no longer stands. So that means that the states have been making decisions upon how abortion shows up in their states. And so some states have said that you can have an abortion up to 6 weeks. That's one of the things that we're fighting in the state of Georgia, because we're trying to expand that to make sure that people have access to more time to be able to make decisions about their bodies with their healthcare provider and really know what's happening to be able to make their best decisions. Some states you can go up to 18 weeks. Some states you can go up to 21 weeks, right? So unfortunately, because there isn't just a paintbrush that we can paint to say that everything is the same, because this decision has sent this back down to the states, which means that you do have to pay attention to what's happening at your state legislature. That is so critically important to everything that we are talking about, whether it's healthcare or economics or whatever it may be. But in particular, around abortion access in this country, you do have to pay attention to what's happening at your state legislature, so you will know what's happening. Some states are also pushing ballot initiatives to push back against what may be happening at their state legislature, saying that we the people, right, are saying that we actually want to make abortion accessible in our state. So there are many things at play. I think that what you can also do right now, on top of staying, connected to what's happening at your state legislature, is to follow organizations like mine, to follow think tanks and research organizations like the Guttmacher Institute. These places are constantly giving us up-to-date information as to what is happening and what is the lay of the land across the country as it pertains in particular to abortion access in this country. But just to be clear, again, there's no one killing babies out here, right? People are making their own decisions. That is true, though, about what is important for them and their lives, right? Because that is what reproductive justice is all about. For those who may not understand that term and think it's a little bit different than reproductive health and rights, it is, because this is a movement that was created by Black women 30 years ago this year, that said that we have the human right to be able to make our own decisions about our bodies and our families and our futures, right? That we have the right to make those decisions. And so we're going to do that by deciding if and when we want to have kids. We want to make sure our children are taken care of and have access to what they need to thrive. And we want to make sure that we have access to be able to have our human rights of bodily autonomy, you know, in this country. So that's what the work is. But when we think about the lay of the land, I just want to be very real for the people who are on this call with us, y'all. We have to pay attention not only what's happening federally, but what is happening at the state level, because our states are making really critical decisions around our healthcare, around our bodies, and we have to be tapped in. So while we are fighting for a federal resolve and a federal, you know, rebirth of what's happening around Roe v. Wade, we now have to make sure that we are taking that fight just as aggressively to our states, because it does look different across our states at this particular moment.
So 2 last points, and I want to give Saida and you, Monica, an opportunity just to talk about, and Saida on mental health, because we don't talk enough about that. And then finally, Monica, talk a little bit about contraception and talk a little about IVF. People are confused about that. So we have abortion, we have contraception, we have IVF. Break that down. We have a little bit of time, but we'll start with Saida. If you can talk about mental health in our communities, what are the issues and how we need to address them?
Sure. I kind of said earlier, you know, how our healthcare is very racialized. Our mental health is also very much racialized. A few years ago, we saw throughout the states, and not all, but some states that actually finally recognized that, you know, racial trauma is actually a mental health issue. And so acknowledging the fact that just living in this world, living in this country, living in our skin specifically is traumatizing and does impact our mental health and our wellness is something that we have to just first acknowledge. And the same way we talk about substance use, these issues have been highly stigmatized across the board in our community because we see it as some form of weakness. And so we have to get past the idea that our resilience or our strength is somehow reduced if for some reason we say we need assistance and help. We have to be able to say that my body cannot survive without my mind being right. If I want to continue to be able to battle heart disease or battle, you know, diabetes or anything, I got to have my mind right. Right. And so there is nothing wrong with saying that we need to get help and assistance. And anybody that we put into any position of power should be concerned about the way that we think. ELMCOR is an organization, we pride ourselves in not being a single issue organization. And so when Monica talks about reproductive health, I'm so excited to hear that because we also provide comprehensive reproductive health education for young people. Because what I want to be clear of is we won't go backwards. We are not going back into the past. And as I heard Monica speak, all I could hear in my head was, I hope that Black people really remember that there was a time where people was making choices for our wombs, for our bodies, for our reproductive movement, for their commodity and for their benefit. And we will not allow you to control our bodies at all anymore. Those days are long over. We're not going back. And so we have to be able to say these things to anyone running for anything. We have to be able to say that our vote is valuable. We know that, we understand that, and every issue that impacts us is everyone's issue.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Monica.
I know we must be in church. Can we just shout for a quick?
Listen, let's just get a quick little praise break in.
Mind right.
Because we're not going back. That's absolutely right, sis. We are not going back. And everything that you just said was nothing but the truth. And my grandmama told me a long time ago, it don't take long to tell the truth. So let me break down your question for you, Alfonso. Right? So one of the things that is really clear that for everyone to understand is that there is a plethora of ways that we are able to think about our fertility in this world, right? And so we are trying to, a couple of things. One, I apologize, y'all. They were trying to move me, but I'm back. Apologies. One thing. So when we think about barriers, right, we think about the fact that we need access to contraception in this country, that there's many different barrier methods for that. There's IUDs, right? This is something that you actually implant in your body, gives you what you need in terms of hormonal work to be able to prevent pregnancies, right? That's also condoms. That's also, rings. There's so many different things that fall under the contraception route of things to be able to, again, make sure that you are able to control when you want to have a child. The other thing that I want to talk about when we talk about IVF, because that's also under attack in this country right now, infertility is an issue, and it's a really big issue for Black women. It's something we've been talking a lot about at Sister Song. It's a lot of research that we're now trying to be a part of to make sure that we are really getting the voices and the stories of Black women in particular out in this world, because our access to fertility services in this country is limited. This is so expensive. And right now they're also attacking that as we are seeing the attacks on our reproductive freedom continue to grow. But IVF is our assisted part of our reproductive health care that gives us the ability to bring children into this world, right? So a lot of queer and trans folks are using this, but also folks who are just trying to create their families, and they're coming up against different challenges. And so we want to make sure that people have access to that and that it's affordable, that it's accessible for folks, right? So I also want to throw into the mix, as we think about contraception versus IVF versus abortion, all of these things are falling under the whole realm of what reproductive health care is all about. But another piece that we don't talk enough about is access to comprehensive sex education in this country, right? So we talk about not having a baby, we talk about having babies, we talk about making it hard to have babies, but we ain't talking about the thing that we do that actually puts us in that position, right? And how are we actually setting people up for success in that way, and teaching young people about consent, about their bodies at a young age, so by the time they get to their decision-making years, that they are set up to be able to make their best decisions. So that was a very quick and dirty. I'm telling y'all, if y'all want to go deeper into this, come around our way. We'll give you all the good things. But Alfonso, to answer your question, that's just a little bit of a breakdown of like what those things are. But just to go back and to give a final thought to even what my dear sister Saida was saying, right? We are not and we cannot go back. I need Black people to understand that we have always controlled our fertility against so many odds, against violence, against so much, right? And so we are now in a position in this country where we have a force that is really trying its best to take us back to a place where we are not able to make our own decisions about our bodies and our families and our lives. And this is why we cannot separate our reproductive healthcare needs, our reproductive freedoms from this bigger fight that we are in for Black liberation in this country. When we do that, we sell ourselves short, and we will on the other side not really truly have the liberation that we seek. So all of this is connected. Audre Lorde said that we cannot have single issue movements because we do not live single issue lives. And that is at the root of the work that we do every single day. And that is why we have to ensure that these types of conversations keep happening, Black folks, because we are not a monolith. And we need to understand how all of these things intertwine with each other, and how we got to make sure that we are untangling them to get closer to our freedom. So I am grateful to be in this fight with all of y'all. And this is so good that we are having these conversations, because we got a long way to go to get to November, but I believe that we're going to get there with a lot of power at the end.
Okay,
you had that, Lord. My God. My God. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the comments. I'm having my own little shout party over here, but it's so true and so necessary. You two queens are just, I wish I might replay this in the morning, Alfonso, just to hear it when I wake up. Thank you, because you are helping us. Thank you for the work that you do.
Monica Simpson, Executive Director of Sister Song, Saida Dunstan, CEO of MCOR. Thank you for your time, for your brilliance, for your attention. Thank you. And now we are going to our final topic of the evening, focusing on public safety, gun violence, policing, criminal justice reforms, reparations. These are all issues that affect us directly, and we are extremely lucky and privileged to have with us a key expert on public safety issues. Rashad Robinson is the president of Color of Change, which is a racial justice organization with more than 7 million members who demonstrate the power of Black communities every single day. Color of Change uses innovative strategies to bring about lasting change in systems and sectors that affect Black people's lives. Rashad Robinson, thank you so much for taking the time and for joining us.
Yes,
It's great to be with y'all.
look, the Paint the Pose Black stage is hot and it's about to get hotter.
Yeah, I was hearing this last conversation. We'd always want to follow Dr. Simpson, but she and that was a great conversation. And so important the way that all of these issues intersect. And I hope that to be able to connect when we talk about justice issues and criminalization, what is happening around the criminalization of Black women and Black people for reproductive choices, right? These bans and these attacks on reproductive freedom are also part of a criminalization strategy. And so we can't separate any of those things, because that powerful quote of Audre Lorde, right? The idea that we don't live single issue lives, right? People don't experience issues, we experience life, and the forces that hold us back are interrelated. So a racist criminal justice system requires a racist media culture. Economic inequality goes hand in hand with political inequality. So I'm so glad you all are taking the time to have these conversations, and I'm so glad that you are connecting these issues, because for all of us every single day, we are facing these challenges and these issues and these opportunities together.
I like that you said the word opportunity, and I was going to jump to the mass shooting about Georgia, but take us through that word opportunity first, because a lot of times we do all these issues that we're talking about that are affecting Black America. What is the opportunity that you are seeing as we talk about these issues?
Well, the opportunity is to win, right? To win more things that actually make people's lives better. Elections are not about giving politicians jobs. They're about making people's lives better. And so as we paint the polls Black, as we head into this election, the opportunity here is to put people in office that we can negotiate with, that will be on the other side of the table, to be partners, right? Not our heroes, not our leaders, but our partners in actually getting things done. So I think a lot about opportunity, because that's why we do this work. You have to be an optimist. You have to be aspirational to be a civil rights leader, because you have to believe that even in the face of so many challenges, even in the face of systemic structural barriers, even in the face of systems that were not designed for us to win, that coming together, we can still win. We can still make progress. We can still move things forward. So opportunity is one of those things I think about all the time. I think about it in our campaign work when I'm thinking about where are the openings, what are the levers, what are the things that we can actually do if we push people, if we open up the possibility for more people to get involved. The opportunities can be vast. And that in so many ways is how we should be approaching this. We have to be clear-eyed about the challenges, but we also have to be clear-eyed about the opportunities.
Let's start with some of even the challenges. There was the mass gun shooting recently in Georgia. There was one a few weeks ago in another part of the country. We all watched what happened at the high school. The epidemic of mass shootings has become, an epidemic in the entire country. Can you dissect this issue, how important this is for voters, and what is the problem? Are we not addressing certain things? How can we do that? What is it that the parties really need to do?
So, it does go back to a confluence of things. But first and foremost, far too often we see issues like gun violence or issues like the challenges in our criminal justice system or so many of these other issues as unfortunate. Like, that is so sad. What can I do about it? And when we see those issues as unfortunate, rather than seeing them as unjust, people sometimes kind of put their hands up. They kind of think about it almost like a car accident, like it kind of just happened. And when we think about problems as unfortunate rather than unjust, we can oftentimes get charitable solutions to structural problems. And in the case of what happens so much with these mass sort of violent attempts with guns and the killings is that we end up with people avoiding the actual problem. And that is all the ways in which the manufacturing and the proliferation of guns is deeply profitable. And when you combine that with racism and manufactured inequality, you add gasoline to a match and you get exactly what is intended to get. You get these violent and you get these deeply challenging situations that could have been avoided. And so what I think is really important is that we can't ignore sort of all the ways in which gun manufacturers, the gun industry writes the laws in this country around guns. From the vehicle of the NRA that they used to use to how they buy off and own politicians. 70 to 80% of Americans want sensible gun laws. We have the vast majority of people that want more rollbacks to the availability of guns, the availability of the type of weapons we're seeing used in so many of these situations. And we don't actually get there because of the way that money in politics and the way that the gun industry has been able to own elected officials. And so that's really important to remember because sometimes the story just gets told that it's simply about Democrats and Republicans. And when we only tell the story about those in elected office and we leave out the confluence of other actors that are playing a role, we don't tell people a true story about the barriers that are actually holding us back from winning. And we don't give people all the tools that they need to be able to force elected leaders to do the right thing, to hold them accountable. And we also don't tell the right story to everyone about what does it actually require us in terms of how many people we need in office, right? We can't have small margins of victories on these issues. We can't have the House of Representatives and the Senate controlled by just, one or two votes. We actually need majorities that are going to be robust. And then once we put people in office, we have to do the work to hold them accountable. And then we also have to do the work around corporate accountability. All of those things are connected in order to be able to get us the type of changes that we need. And so the story of why we haven't actually won is a story of all of the ways in which those who are deeply powerful and are deeply moneyed and will fight like hell in order to prevent us from winning. And so I oftentimes tell my team when we're building a campaign, especially a corporate campaign, or especially a campaign where we know we have powerful forces standing in the way, right? And that's oftentimes anything that Black people want. That there are people on the other side. So much of racism in this country is upheld by people who are profiting from that racism, right? This is not simply about changing someone's hearts and minds. This is about dealing with people's wallet incentives. And so I tell my team oftentimes that we will lose in the back rooms if we don't have people lined up at the front door. And so part of what I want to say to the people who are watching and listening is that you are the people that we need lined up at the front door. You are the people that I want to invite to stand with us and fight with us through an election cycle, but beyond an election cycle, because part of how we actually have to do this work is we have to put people in office that will be that partner on the other side, as I said. And then we have to sometimes not just let them know, but sometimes prove to them that we will take them out if necessary.
Come on.
We're in church today. So Rashad, I just want you, because a part of what we are trying to do here is of course provide information, but also address misinformation. And when we often talk about gun control or gun legislation, there's a common rhetoric that we hear, which is Second Amendment. Under the Constitution, we have a right to own guns. Help us square, for folks who may not be deeply steeped in this issue, whether or not that is a real argument, and if so, how do you address it?
Well, it's not a real argument. I mean, the Second Amendment, like so many of these amendments, were put in place during a very different time in our history, in our country. And there's a lot that was in the Constitution that had to evolve and has been interpreted over the years. Over the years, the courts have interpreted this idea of access to guns to give people to access to guns that didn't exist and couldn't have possibly been imagined at the time that the Constitution was written. They couldn't have imagined the type of automatic weapons that are now being defended by Second Amendment, quote unquote, Second Amendment advocates who are not actually advocating for the Second Amendment, because we've seen over the years when Black people, whether it was Black Panthers or others, have sought, efforts to own guns, people have said, oh, whoa, we've got to think about this in a different way. Perhaps we need to scale things back. And so, once again, this has very much been connected to the profit incentives. So take, for instance, the Stand Your Ground laws. The Stand Your Ground laws that are written by an organization called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC is a right-wing think tank. They operate in state legislatures around the country. And basically what they do is they bring corporations and they bring state legislators together, right-wing state legislators, and they write legislation for corporations. And they are so successful that ALEC can sometimes bring people together at their conference, write the legislation. State legislators will go back home and introduce it and sometimes forget to take the ALEC logo off the top of the page, and the bill will still pass. That is how successful ALEC actually has been over the years. And what is so nefarious about the whole thing is the Stand Your Ground law was really written by the gun industry. It was written by gun manufacturers and gun sellers in order to be able to do a really important thing for all the viewers to understand, is to sort of hype up this threat of Black kind of predators in communities with white fear, and to let white people know, hey, you can go out and buy guns to keep yourself safe from these like threats of Black people moving into your neighborhoods. And there's something called the Stand Your Ground law. And the Stand Your Ground law was written by ALEC, advanced into states around the country, and sold as a way to kind of push white folks to be able to own guns. And we know the impacts of Stand Your Ground. We know it through very high profile cases like Jordan Davis and Trayvon Martin. But we also know it from the times when Black people have sought to use and leverage Stand Your Ground when they were under attack, and it didn't actually apply to them. And so, and the courts didn't allow. And there were always a reason why Black people couldn't leverage Stand Your Ground the way that white people can. I explained the Stand Your Ground, and I explained all of that to kind of give us a sense of how bad faith all of these arguments are around guns, how it really isn't about people having access to be able to hunt or even to protect themselves in their homes. This is really about upholding an industry that in order for it to survive, they need people to own lots of guns, not just one gun. They need people to be able to buy the latest guns, not just have one gun in their home to be able to, quote unquote, protect themselves. And the larger conversation of being able to create this demand for people, to make people believe that they need these guns, it is a race to the bottom, and it doesn't have any sort of bottom in terms of where it might stop and where we hold people accountable.
I'm glad you brought up. I do want those who are watching go and Google if you don't even know about it, because you alluded to it earlier, Rashad. That was the Mulford Act in 1967 when the Black Panthers showed up with guns protesting gun control legislation in California. And they were like, oh, no, we will not do this. And then Reagan,
not today. They're like, oh,
we showed up with guns. They were like, oh no, we need to change these rules. But the fact is, the power of what happens when we show, I'm not telling people to do that, but the power of what happens when we show up, like immediately, that just goes to show you how quickly legislation can change when people really want legislation to change. But I want to talk about we all remember the killing of George Floyd, and many people remember other Black men and women who have been killed and harmed by police. We just seen Breonna Taylor case with the judges saying now it was her boyfriend's fault for the reason why she was killed, and not the police officer who showed up without a warrant, the whole and admitted to lying. But from her to Amadou Diallo, there's been legislation introduced in many parts of the country on a federal level. Outline for us what the main issue is you feel around policing and how it factors into this election, because we haven't been able to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed, even though this administration has passed some of the most extensive legislation on guns.
Yeah. So what we've been able to get in terms of policing by this administration is executive orders. And it's important for people to understand why and what that means. And so the president has gone as far as he possibly can at the federal level to rein in the overreach of police, and has signed these executive orders. The George Floyd and Policing Act, which by no means was perfect, but was the sort of best negotiated piece of legislation we could get to, was not passed because of a number of factors. And the main factor is the number of is that you had to get 60 senators to avoid a filibuster. And I remember in those final days of trying to push for it before the 2022 election, and talking to folks like Senator Booker and others who were actively working. And then there was folks on the other side, like Tim Scott, who was promising us if we just gave up something called qualified immunity, and I will explain that in a second. If we just gave up something called qualified immunity, perhaps he could get 10 Republican senators, that he could promise us 10 Republican senators, and those 10 Republican senators would help us break the filibuster, get us to 60 votes, and be able to pass this legislation. And I say all of this to say that this is what I mean by losing in the back rooms if we don't have people lined up at the front door. Now, we were very clear that there was no way that we could give up qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is this idea that makes police officers the only industry, right? Basically the only industry where people can go and do harm and are completely immune from any type of liability. And this qualified immunity was something that police officers rely on. And in some ways, the lack of accountability and the lack of consequence in so many ways not just drives the behavior of police, but drives our inability to actually make any real changes. And so we didn't get George Floyd and Policing Act, but we have to understand that the people in office, the White House, worked really hard to get us there, and we pushed really hard. And along the way, we got some other things. And then we also got things in the states around the country. And we got changes in states in terms of justice acts. We elected reform-minded prosecutors in counties around the country, and we worked with cities to be able to do better. We watched in a number of places that police officers who previously probably wouldn't have been prosecuted for harm. And most recently, we saw in Springfield, Illinois, police officers quickly being held accountable after the horrific murder of Miss Massey. And so when we see these type of situations time and time again, we understand that part of this work is both the cultural and narrative change work, the changing the unwritten rules, and then part of this work is about changing the written rules. And we say a lot at Color of Change that we can't mistake presence for power. And what I mean by that is presence is visibility, awareness, retweets, shout outs from the stage. It is what people sort of, when they know you have an issue and they're with you, or they're saying they're with you, that's presence. And presence isn't a bad thing. But power is the ability to change the rules. And when we mistake presence for power, we can sometimes think something happened that didn't happen. We can think a Black president means we're post-racial when it doesn't. We can think that when a pop star from our community stops the internet when they release a new album, that means America loves us as much as it loves our culture. And we know that America can love, celebrate, and monetize Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And so part of building the work ahead, part of not mistaking presence for power, is recognizing that as much as this work, as much as these demands are in the press, are visible, that part of getting us over the hill is all of the work that we have to do to be able to actually change the rules. And the final thing I'll say about all that is that this goes back to what I talked about guns, is that we also have to continue to remember who's on the other side, who is blocking and stopping, and why mass incarceration, why the type of horrific policing, why it is profitable, why there are forces holding it up, whether it be police unions, whether it be corporations that benefit from the prison industrial complex. Those things are important. And it may feel like I'm kind of going on and sharing a lot of kind of detail that makes this complicated. But I just want us to all step back. If someone's job, if someone's livelihood relies on the current status quo, and our work is about changing that status quo, then we've got to fight like hell, because the people on the other side believe that they are fighting like hell, because what is our oppression has become their survival.
Let's talk about oppression for a little bit. There's been an ongoing and somewhat controversial discussion around reparations.
Mm-hmm.
Break this down for us. Tell us where the political parties are on this issue. And then tell us why this conversation about reparations relate to public safety in Black communities.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is this relevant to voting?
Well, we have to repair harm. Part of justice, part of progress is repairing what was done. And we've seen this country provide reparations when harm was caused, most notably to Japanese Americans who were put in internment camps and were provided reparations. And that was important. Black people, descendants of slaves, built this country for free. The head start that America got from 400 years of free labor, from all the ways in which the contributions across the board were very much not rewarded, not paid, and then it continued beyond the enslavement to sets of laws which extracted from communities, which held people down and held people back, and held other Black people back who came to this country later. But the fight for reparations, particularly for descendants of slaves, but across the board for Black people, is incredibly important for us to be able to set ourselves on the right foot moving forward, to be able to put in place laws moving forward that actually serve all of us. And so there's a couple of ways in which this breaks down. HR 40, which is the House legislation, which is championed originally by the late, great John Conyers, and then masterfully by the legendary late now Sheila Jackson Lee, who my organization honored posthumously last night here at the Congressional Black Caucus Week. They championed that. I remember that anytime Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee would see me speak, or anytime we would be in a place, and if I didn't mention reparations, she would call me afterwards or send me a note or bring it up because she was tireless in trying to advance HR 40, which is a study legislation, which creates sort of a panel that really looks at reparations and starts building the education and energy and muscle to get us closer to being able to do the work. But federally, there is a conversation around reparations, but there's conversations that are happening in communities around this country. And there are cities and counties and locations that have gone into study plans, that have built out commissions, that have started to actually move different types of reparations. And it's looked different in different places. But part of the narrative that we have to build around this is that this is about allowing this country to release itself from the harm that in so many ways prevents us from actually fully moving forward, to actually pay back the debt that is owed, so that we can release ourselves into the next phase of opportunity and engagement. The other place that I think it's important for people to understand where the sort of different parties differ is who they will appoint to key positions, right? What we know is that the right-wing administration will put in place right-wing judges who, during the years of Donald Trump, judges were put in place, not just at the Supreme Court level, who have undone affirmative action and continued the process of dismantling voting rights and other pieces, but have said things like Brown versus Board of Education wasn't decided correctly, and other things that seem absolutely outrageous on their face, but they say it with a straight face. And when they are put in the position to do it, they will actually go about dismantling all of our progress. And so something that is as forward-looking and creates so much possibility as reparations will be impossible for us to achieve if we have people who are given lifetime appointments in the courts that will literally be focused on turning us backwards. And so any type of opportunity or time to turn us forward will be almost impossible.
Wow. So you did light a match. You pour a little more gasoline on it. You gave us a lot. I was over here writing some notes. I thank you. No, but what you said was so important. And it was eye-opening, and I hope and pray that all those who are watching, not just this conversation, but the other conversations from tonight too, that this gives you something not to just think about, but to also talk about, right? These are conversations that we have to talk about and challenge each other on. So thank you so much, Rashad Robinson, and the work that you are doing, Color of Change. Alfonso.
Thank you, Rashad Robinson. Again, thank you to all of our speakers who joined us this evening. We hope that you, the voters who are watching, have more information. We hope that you are registered to vote, and we hope that you do vote. We've said this before, and I'll say it again. Our right to vote is sacred. And if we don't exercise it, someone else will actually dictate how we live our lives. So we hope this serves as a meaningful resource to you. I want to thank again the Sundial Group of companies, including Essence and the Global Black Economic Forum, Girls United, Afropunk, Refinery 29, BeautyCon, and the New Voices Foundation for helping us to support this town hall. The stakes are very high. We've talked about this, and I think we have to remind everyone that the stakes are very high. So please make sure that you have the information, the resources, and the support to exercise your right to vote and protect our future. Ebony, I'll turn it over to you for the last word.
I just want to say thank you to all those who came together to bring this together. Thank you for allowing me to be on this stage. And I will say, just to end, none of this matters if you do not go vote. If you do not go and paint the polls Black. All of this rich conversation that we got, it is because we want you to know that you can be in control of your destiny, of your future, but you have to start. Voting is just the ground level. But thank you, everyone. And look, come back next time. We're gonna keep doing this, right, Alfonso?
We are. The next town hall will be about youth. Young people are not only our future, but they impact elections. So we're going to be talking to young voters from the millennial generation to the Gen Z generation, which are emerging as the demographic center of power in American politics. So we will have our next town hall. Please watch out for it. We'll be sending out some social media assets to make sure that all of you join us. And thank you again for joining us for this town hall.